on C, and B, it keeps our link alive with City of Cortland, and we appreciate your willingness to.
Sir, welcome to the board. With that, I would like to make the motion that we all anticipating, and that is the appointment of Clint Brooks as the secretary of the IDA. And could I have a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's passed. Clint's the new secretary.
Who made the motion?
Steve made the motion. And Miranda, you second?
No, you made it, Steve.
Oh, yeah, first.
Just
I
ask
made
Clint
it.
if you wrote it down.
Steve is here. Okay, now we want to go right to Chris.
Let's get the reports out of the way first, and then reports won't take long.
Okay. Let's do the reports. Who's giving?
Karen.
Let them rip, please.
So in your board books, you had our 3 reports that are required by the public authority. The first was the acquisition and disposition of real property report. You'll note if you look through this report, it shows the real property that's held in the name of the IDA. There was no real property disposed of during the year, and it also showed the acquisition, which was the conveyance from the BBC to the IDA property that the BBC owned. And the report, the next report that goes on is the investment report. This report reflects on the interest that was earned on the IDA generated accounts which are held with the M&T Bank. I'll note that the amounts that are reflected in this report match the financials that you received at the January meeting for the December financials, which are in your packet for the December financials. And then lastly, we have the procurement report. This is the PARIS. This is the Authority Budget's software program that you put this information into their software program, and it would be a report that shows any purchases that were made through the year from the IDA that were $5,000 or higher. And I don't know if there's any questions on any of those reports. Happy to answer any questions. If not, then I would like you to approve them and accept them.
Okay, thanks for the reports. You want a motion for approval?
Please.
Okay, may I have a motion to accept all of the reports in one motion, please?
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
We accept them. Thank you, Karen.
Mr. Chairman, before you move on, I do have an item that I'll have to add to the agenda. There's no hurry, it can wait. I just wanted not to be surprised. Good. That's why I was late this morning.
Okay. Is it appropriate to go now or to wait?
I didn't want to hold you up. No, you can wait. I didn't want to hold up your plan. I just wanted to add one item.
Then we're on to you, Chris.
Right, so Chris Carrick is here with us, Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board. We've worked with Chris for a bit now on multiple things, but most recently to tap into his expertise related to solar development in and around the region. And of course, our conversations have been more frequent lately because we are working with multiple project proposals in multiple locations around the county. Probably the most significant at this point is the so-called Article 10 EDF project that would impact the towns of Cortland, Solon, and Homer. We do not yet have an application in support of that project from EDF, but the Article 10 process is much different than the process that we follow in approving projects such as the one here in Cortland, the one we approved for Wood. This is a much larger project. It means that the State of New York Public Services Commission is going to be really running the project in many ways and will be responsible for permitting. What might come our way, however, if we do get an application from EDF, will be an application to consider incentives to allow the project to move forward. We're not here to talk about that at this point because, as I said, we don't have that application. But I thought, in anticipation of those discussions, it'd be good to have a little bit respecting the Article 10 process, and that's what Chris has prepared for us. So there's no action that will be required, but it's informational, I think, and I hope the IDA board will find it useful as we move forward with these things. So with that, I'll introduce Chris.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. As Gary mentioned, we have been having more conversations lately about some of the projects that have come for review, but particular impetus for this presentation today is the Article 10 EDF project. Just so folks are aware, if you're not, our office did prepare a portfolio of Article 10 projects across the state that we are familiar with. We sent this to Gary, and we can certainly make this available to anyone who's interested. Really just a summary compendium of information that the developers have provided to the Public Service Commission. So there's a few dozen projects outlined in that portfolio. I do have copies of the slide deck presentation. I only have 10. I'll pass those out, and if the board members want to take those and others can share, that would be fine. So in putting this presentation together, I did make it fairly broad because I was not sure what base of knowledge you all were starting from. So forgive me if I'm covering ground that you already are familiar with, but there may be different levels of knowledge and experience in the room, so I thought it would be best to sort of start from square one. But I can move through things more quickly if it is repetitive or unnecessary. If you have questions as we go along, please raise your hand and ask them. I do have probably much more material that we can cover in the time allotted today because of that reason. And I do have information related to pilot agreements in here as well. So I think we'll just see how far we can get with the presentation. Just let me know, Gary, when we need to move on in your agenda. So I'm doing this with this behind my back, so forgive me.
It's our new
It
rule.
won't be too awkward. Yeah, right.
He's got heat.
So, right, for those of you who are not familiar, the Regional Planning and Development Board is a public agency created by the 5 counties of central New York, including Cortland County, back in 1966. So Cayuga, Madison, Oswego, Onondaga are the other 4 counties that we serve. The energy program, which I manage, does a lot of different things in 3 main areas: planning, project development, and public engagement. I've highlighted here in red some of the recent solar work that we've been doing over the last several years. So just to give you a bit of reference point for who I am. So just to give everyone a level set on where New York is in terms of its energy mix today, you can see this breakdown. The majority of our electricity is powered by non-renewable sources, including nuclear, which is carbon emissions free but not renewable. So you can see the percentage there based in renewable sources. Most of that's coming from hydroelectric, which has been the case for many, many decades, as you probably know. So you can see that wind and solar are still fairly small, but they are growing fairly rapidly, and the intent, of course, is to continue to grow them. So this gives you a sense of where things have been over the last several years and where things are more recently in terms of the percentage of power coming from renewable sources. You can see it fluctuates. That's in part because the renewables share is growing as more solar and wind comes online, but also because the state's total electricity consumption has varied a little bit. You can see it dipped a little bit in 2017, picked up in 2018. That has to do with economic factors as well as weather-related factors. So you can see that percentage of the renewable share changes. When talking about New York State and its electric power mix, you really need to keep in mind that we have 2 separate grids in New York State. There really is two separate, an upstate grid and a downstate grid. And you can see the portfolio and the mix of electricity sources varies quite a bit between those two sources, with upstate being much cleaner, if you will, much more reliance on non-fossil fuel sources, including the three large nuclear plants that we have. There's a bottleneck in the central part of the state around the Marcy region, which prevents our growing share of renewable sources from being exported to downstate regions where there is much more demand for that. So that's an issue in terms of bringing on more solar and wind resources, but that's a technical issue, and I suspect that the NISO, the independent system operator, which operates the wholesale grid, has been studying this quite a bit. They have this problem well in hand, I would say, and I would expect that at some point in the next decade or two, that this transmission blockage will be resolved one way or another. So when it comes to the state's energy policy, the overall framework is what's called the Reforming the Energy Vision Initiative, which is Governor Cuomo's broad sweeping vision for changing the state's electricity system into a cleaner, more resilient grid. Most recently, through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was adopted last summer, the share of renewables was increased, targeted from 50% by 2030 to 70% by 2030. So again, if you recall, we're at about 28, 29% now. That's quite a lot of growth that is expected in the next decade. Part of the way that we'll get there is through the Clean Energy Fund, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's ratepayer money that we all pay as residential, industrial, commercial customers of our utilities into a fund that's administered by NYSERDA for various programs. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that I just mentioned set out a whole bunch of specific targets in law, which was an advance from the point of the advocates over previous executive actions. By setting these targets in law, I will note that there are no penalties expressed in the law for failure to meet these targets. So that's an important issue. But the offshore wind target was quadrupled, for example, to 9,000 megawatts or 9 gigawatts. The solar goal was doubled from 3,000 megawatts to 6,000 megawatts. These are quite ambitious goals, nation-leading goals, as the governor likes to call them. And most recently, in his 2021 budget proposal, a more ambitious, if you want to use that word, agenda was set out. $33 billion in the governor's words, a 5-year plan to address climate change. And you can see some of the specifics that were mentioned in media accounts. There's, I would say, not a lot of specifics, at least that I'm aware of at this point. This will all be worked out, of course, hopefully by the April budget deadline. But you can see some of the specific things like offshore wind, lots of funding being put into that, and land-based renewables, including things like solar and the EDF project. That's of interest to all of you. So, clean energy funding, I mentioned, $5 billion fund from ratepayers. This is the breakdown of the CEF and its predecessor fund and what the monies have been going to. You can see a pretty even split between energy efficiency and renewables, with some other varieties of initiatives thrown into the mix as well. Now, when it comes to solar, the particular initiative is called New York Sun. That was, prior to the recent doubling of the target from 3 to 6 gigawatts, a $1 billion fund, more or less. And the goal was to create, in the governor and NYSERDA's terms, a self-sustaining market. And you'll see what I mean by that as the presentation goes along, but the funding allocated to solar to help defray the significant upfront costs of capital are declining and have been declining for quite some time over the last few years. So the theory is, as developers get more efficient in building these systems and deploying their resources, they will need less subsidy from the state. And that's exactly what's been happening. Now, there's a variety of different types of solar, of course, out in the marketplace, and it's important just to spend a moment to
distinguish them because it's very important for the work that you do here in terms of administering pilot agreements and other forms of support for these larger projects in particular. But there's been a lot of small-scale rooftop solar activity for years, and New York has been one of the leaders in the state in this part of the market. This tends to be much less controversial than some of the other projects because the land use implications are a lot less significant, and of course, the issue of public subsidy in the form of pilots doesn't really come into play. But as the systems have gotten larger, that's when the public policy implications have gotten a little bit more salient. This just gives a sense of scale. There's lots of different ways of defining and categorizing solar. There's terms like small solar, and medium and large solar, utility solar, and community solar. Um, I like to think of this from a planner's point of view, who's mostly concerned with land use issues and other public policy, in terms of the size of these projects, because I think that has the most implication for what we think about when we think about community character, quality of life, and so on. So just a rough rule of thumb here on the right-hand side of this graphic, showing you a sense of how many acres are involved, for example, in the grounds-based community solar or utility scale solar projects that we'll mostly focus on today. So about 6 acres per megawatt. So a 98 megawatt system like EDF has proposed gives you a sense of, you're talking about 540 to 600 acres, somewhere in that range. Now, again, the small scale solar was largely supported with incentives from NYSERDA. When I started working in this space 12 years ago, the cost of solar was $7, $8 a watt, and now it's down below $3 a watt. The incentives have gone down accordingly. But net metering is also a very important public policy that enabled customers who put solar on their own roof, their own property, to benefit from exporting energy to the grid when they didn't need it. It's a fairly straightforward mechanism based on a fairly simple sort of technology. I won't linger on this really, but net metering again allows customers to export their energy to the grid when they don't need it. So they're not home during the day, the sun is activating the panels are producing electricity, no one's using electricity at home, it goes onto the grid for the benefit of the local neighbors. And you can see this display shows on a daily basis what that might look like with a peak export during the sort of peak sun hours of the day. Now, as you move forward to a yearly basis, it looks something like this, where you're producing much more electricity in the summer than you need, typically, and you roll over those credits a lot like minutes on your cell phone plan into subsequent months. And customers would have an anniversary date where they would true up all of their production and match that to their consumption. And if you were over that, you produce more than you needed, you get a very low wholesale rate for your power. So it really didn't make sense to do that. So now moving on to the larger scale solar. These are two examples of what is still called customer-sited solar development. So these are built for a particular customer, whether it's the town of Ontario or Clarkson University, for their needs. Obviously much larger scale, ground-based, but it's still sort of for a particular customer. This part of the market has kind of been chugging along. We're not the biggest state in this space. California and Massachusetts are much bigger. But what's really come online in the last couple of years is this principle or idea of community solar. And the reason for that is because a lot of customers couldn't put those panels on their roof, but they were interested in buying solar energy. So a developer could site an array somewhere on a field, and customers could subscribe and buy the power from these arrays, typically at a reduced rate compared to their utility power. And so this has been taking off quite a bit. You can see there's just an image of one of the many, many ribbon cuttings of the dozens of projects that have happened over the last several years. So how it works, it really just as I described, the energy is produced, it goes into the grid. There's a process whereby the developer and the utility have a reconciliation reconciliation where they account for who's buying the power on a subscription basis. Those customers, those subscribers are assigned bill credits. Those are monetary credits to their utility bill. The value of that credit is determined through a fairly complex formula that the state has devised in order to fairly gauge the benefits that solar provides to the grid from a technical point of view and to the environment in terms of reducing peak load, in terms of reducing the need for peaking power plants that fire up very heavy cost to ratepayers during the summer months to meet that heavy air conditioning need, and a host of other factors. So that's what goes into the assignment and the valuation of those bill credits. It's important to note that any customer within the NISO control area or load zone and the utility area where the project is based, physically based, can subscribe. Okay, so if a project was located in Cortland or Cortlandville, anybody in the blue zone can subscribe to that power. So fairly large area. We are developing a number of these types of projects on municipal property and working closely with the municipalities to try to provide the benefit of subscriptions to the local community as much as possible. So in the town of Skaneateles, we're building on their transfer station. We're going to make these subscriptions available to residents of Skaneateles first, so that we can provide more of a local benefit. We think that's important in terms of maximizing the advantages of things like community solar. So the basics, I've covered some of this already in terms of how much space is needed. Again, 6 acres per megawatt roughly. You can see some other facts or rules of thumb that go into play when it comes to these kinds of community solar developments. And I can make this presentation available to anyone so you have this information as a point of reference. So when it comes to the development process for these community solar, I call them sort of middle tier solar projects. You know, they're 2 megawatts, up to 5 megawatts typically is the maximum you can put on one tax parcel. It's a 2-year process roughly. You know, it begins with siting the project, scouting out opportunities in terms of available land, working with the utility, which is quite an involved process that has very subscribed timelines or proscribed timelines. Working with their financiers, working with taxing jurisdictions or taxing authorities to come up with agreements and so forth. But roughly a 2-year process. You can see here the number of CDG projects, community distributed generation or community solar projects across the state. About 43 of 62 counties in the state are seeing projects proposed. I know there's a handful here in Cortland County. You can see the average project size is 2 megawatts, but that's been increasing since the Public Service Commission increased the cap from 2 megawatts to 5 megawatts per tax parcel. Now, what is the solar market in general doing? This is information pulled from NYSERDA. It's fairly recent, but you can see lots of projects, 127,000 solar projects in the state. Most of those are rooftop solar. There's 1,200 megawatts in the pipeline. Most of what's in the pipeline are those community solar projects that we just talked about. Now, 1,000 of the 1,200 megawatts are the community solar projects. So again, that part of the market is growing quite substantially. Now, this figure does not include the large-scale solar projects that we're going to turn our attention to, the kinds of projects that EDF has proposed, because these projects don't operate on the distribution system, the typical distribution lines you see on our roads and local highways. They operate on the transmission lines. Okay, so 115 kilovolts as opposed to the 34 kilovolts or 13.2 kilovolts that the community solar projects operate on. These larger transmission level utility scale projects are about 1,700 megawatts that have been proposed. And these projects are at 20 megawatts or more in terms of size. So let's turn our attention to these this is an image of the largest developed solar project of this kind, again, utility scale project in the state so far. There are many more that have been developed, as I just mentioned, but this is down on Long Island at Brookhaven National Lab. This is a 32 megawatt project. So you can get a sense of a little bit of the scale of what these projects look like from an aerial view at least. So now 46 projects have been proposed through NYSERDA's Large Scale Renewable Program, or LSR program as they call it. They've run 3 procurements, or they've completed 2 procurements in the middle of finishing the 3rd. So NYSERDA goes out and says, we want to procure solar power or wind power through these large scale projects. Developers come to us with your best projects, tell us how much incentive you need, and NYSERDA runs, it's a reverse auction. So they choose the projects that need the lowest incentive. That's their way of trying to get the biggest bang for the buck in terms of ratepayer funds. So you can see how many projects have been proposed. This is enough to power nearly 1 million homes in the state, more than what's used by the 4 largest upstate cities combined, and enough to create thousands of jobs in terms of NYSERDA's metrics. Now these projects, again, because they go on the transmission system, have to go through the NYSO, because the NYSO, Independent System Operator, is the one that regulates and maintains the wholesale transmission grid. And so there's a whole process that developers have to go through in order to get approval to connect to that system. And so you can see the growth in the queue of these types of projects over time. And here you can see the distribution of these projects. Okay? So projects have been proposed in 32 counties. The majority are about 20 megawatts, but certainly the EDF project, is much larger than that, and we are seeing a number of projects in the North Country and elsewhere that are much larger than the 20 megawatts, which is the average. This is a graphic from the Solar Energy Industry Association, which kind of shows the development process for these larger scale projects. Now this is a much larger, this is 250 megawatts. But just to give you a sense, to compare it to the community solar projects that I talked about earlier. That was a 2-year timeline. Here we're talking about a 4, 5, 6-year timeline, typically, for those kinds of projects. And this is a national organization. This is their national perspective. Now, New York State, in order to try to streamline that process, came up with the Article 10 citing and review process. The intent in the Public Service Law, Article 10, was to try to streamline this. It applies to only projects at 25 megawatts or more. Does not apply to hydro, so it's just solar and wind for the most part. And this has a pedigree, has a history, right? So prior to Article 10, it was Article 8, which dealt with larger projects, 50 megawatts and above. Just after Article 8 was Article X, as it was called. This was much larger projects, 80 megawatts and above. And most of those projects prior to Article 10 were fossil fuel gas-fired projects or coal-powered projects. So what is the purpose? Again, I've already sort of said, to simplify and streamline the process, to lower the threshold for projects that would have to go through this process, to increase funding for what are called interveners. So these are third-party stakeholders that have an interest, whether it's a municipality or community group, to have a voice in the process. That was really a point of criticism of the prior 2 versions of this law. And to include things like environmental justice, public health, other concerns that communities were raising in the siting of these larger facilities. So this is the list sort of active Article 10 projects. You can find this information on the Public Service Commission website. So there are 50 projects currently in the queue. Only 3 have been approved so far, 3 wind projects of an earlier pedigree. So you can see here, I think, that the process hasn't lived up to its purpose in the sense of streamlining the process in terms of time review, because many of those wind projects took 5 years or so to get to that approval phase. So we haven't really done a great job in terms of meeting that legislative purpose. So the way it works is the siting board is the decision maker. Okay, so that's what the law creates, is the siting board. The permanent board consists of agency representatives, as you can see here, and then 2 appointed residents of the project area. So how do those 2 ad hoc members, if you will, get appointed? Each town supervisor and county executive affected by the project, that is jurisdiction of the project, can nominate 4 candidates. Okay, so in the case of EDF, 3 towns, 1 county, that's 12, that's 16 nominees. And then 1 member will be appointed by the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and 1 will be appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly. Okay, so the purpose of the siting board, comprised of those members, is to issue the certificate of environmental compatibility and public need. That's what the developer is looking for. Okay, so that's the siting board, but there's room for much broader participation than that. There are automatic statutory parties that you can see listed here, state agencies. And then there are affected municipalities, individual residents, nonprofit associations that typically get formed when projects like this come to the community, so the Friends of Homer, something like that. Or parties or interveners who request the right if they have good cause shown. So you can't live in a community 200 miles away and try to participate in the EDF siting process. Now, as I mentioned, intervener funding is a big component of this. There are 2 points in the process whereby interveners can get funds, and you can see they're pretty substantial funds that can be used explicitly to hire experts to come up with what are called stipulations in an earlier part of the process, or to counter the developer's experts on specific things like wildlife impacts, or glare, or what is an appropriate setback, or view shed concerns. Okay, so those are the kinds of things that the intervenor funds are intended for. This is just a display of the process, and you can see there are quite a few steps in the process, or points in the process. I've kind of boiled them down for this presentation into 5 major steps, but what I'm trying to show you is the point at which those intervenor funds can be accessed or made available to those stakeholders. So you can see it's fairly early on in the process, in the preliminary scoping statement, and then when the developer actually files its application. Now, I did go to the EDF public meeting last week, I think it was. They had boards set up with 2 of the boards related to the Article 10 process and where they are in the process. They expect to file their application, it looks like, sometime in the fall of 2020. I wouldn't be surprised if that deadline moves a little bit, because they typically do, but just to give you a sense of where the EDF project is. So, again, the 5 major phases, as I'm calling them: pre-application, application, the administrative hearings, the decision, and then the implementation of the project, which involves some compliance, ongoing monitoring and compliance of the project. So I just want to try to move through these fairly quickly. I'm probably taking too much time, but in the pre-application process, it's really sort of setting the groundwork. The applicants file what's called the Public Involvement Program, or PIP, summarizing what it's going to do to educate the community, and that's things like the public meeting that was held last week. The DPS staff have to review and approve that, and that sort of sets out the initial phases or steps of the project. Then there's the preliminary application phase, which is the preliminary scoping statement. So after 150 days of outreach, the applicant files what's called the PSS. I think that's where EDF is at this point. So they describe the proposed facility, its environmental setting, what they anticipate might be adverse impacts, what studies they're proposing to do, and so on, the required information. Okay, again, just to remind you, intervenor funding is made available at that point. It's based on the size of the project, so $350 per megawatt. So you can do the math, 90 megawatts EDF project of what would be available for intervenor funds. That's split 50% for municipal parties and 50% for other local parties. Now, in this pre-application phase, it's meant to be a process of consultation. Okay, so the parties discuss the methodology and the studies that should be performed to develop the actual application that's coming in the next phase. They try to reach agreements or stipulations that I mentioned on the scope and methodology of the study. So if visual impact studies were meant to be done, for example, visual impact is one of the primary concerns with projects like this. They might stipulate, for example, well, how many vantage points should the visualization be done from and at what distance? Something like that would be an example of a stipulation. In the actual application phase, the notice of filing of an application is provided in local newspapers and other means, so the community is made aware the application is coming. It's filed with the siting board and with the jurisdictions at East Landon, and posted online and made available generally to the public. So there's a lot that goes into that actual application, up to 40 required exhibits. And really the whole point of this is to mirror in many ways the SECRA process. Okay, so it's important to note this is not sidestepping SECRA. It's maybe more robust, or at least as robust as SECRA. And it's not meant to overrule local authority either, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so it really is quite involved. Again, an intervenor fund is established, as I mentioned earlier. But here's just a display of the many exhibits that go into this. And if you look at this, later on at your leisure, you'll see it's many of the same topics that would be covered under SECRA: noise, safety, cultural resources, visual impacts, etc.
Chris, could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
What's the definition of environmental justice?
So part of the reason that was salient in the creation of Article 10 is because a lot of folks, particularly I'd say in downstate or more urban areas, were concerned that a lot of these fossil fuel plants were located in low-income communities, or communities of color, to use that phrase. And so they wanted to make sure that that was taken into account, so that there wasn't a disproportionate impact on those communities. And so special attention has to be paid. And some of you may know that the DEC has what they call environmental justice communities that they designated based on census tracts and so forth. So that will become part of the consideration. So the application's filed. Lots goes into it. These are documents that are like 1,000 pages, or stacks and stacks of paper. The intervenor funds are there so that the community has some wherewithal to actually be able to interpret and question, perhaps, the findings or the methodology of those studies. Then it goes into the administrative hearing phase. This is where the rubber really hits the road. So within 60 days of receiving the application, the siting board chair has to determine if it complies with the regulation. All those 40 exhibits are included and so forth, and then the public hearing is scheduled. There's usually a pre-conference hearing before that, but then you go into a typical sort of legal process with discovery and evidentiary hearing and briefings and so forth. This process can take some time, and that's partly why projects that have gone through this have kind of dragged on, a little bit longer than a lot of folks would like. Eventually, they come to the decision phase where they make their findings. Okay, so the environmental impacts have to be minimized or avoided. We'll talk about what that means. The benefits of the project for the whole electric system, the state's energy plan will be considered. Compatibility with state and local laws will be part of that process. Okay, there's supposed to be a 1-year time limit from complete application to decision. So, moving on, the compliance phase is pretty self-explanatory. As I mentioned, there are ongoing monitoring, decommissioning is part of this, right? So we're not left with these facilities that become legacy nuisances on the landscape for decades and so on. So the issue of local laws, this is where I think there's some misinterpretation or misunderstanding of what happens here. So what happens is Article 10 preempts local laws of a procedural nature, right? So you have to file a site plan review within X days, and then it goes to a special permit review and so forth. Those are superseded by Article 10. They do not supersede laws of a substantive nature, except where the citing board determines that those substantive laws are unreasonably burdensome, in the words of the law, in terms of the existing technology or the costs of the project or the needs of the ratepayers and the system overall. So what does that mean? If the town of Homer passed a zoning law that said ground-mounted solar systems can only be 3 feet high off the ground, that would be determined to be unreasonably burdensome because typically these arrays are 9 to 10 feet off the ground. So if you had them 3 feet off the ground, you'd have such a flat tilt angle that the solar array wouldn't produce very much electricity and the project would become financially unreasonable. Very large setbacks from neighboring property lines would be deemed unreasonable because there's no justification for that given the passive nature of solar technology. No emissions, no fumes, no noise, and so forth. So those are just two examples. So this just goes into more detail on what's unreasonably burdensome. I won't linger on this. We can have the discussion if we have time. But I just want to make the point that there's lots of room for public participation in this process. I hope you kind of glean that from my remarks. And again, for the municipalities in particular, these intermediate ones are critical to their being able to stand on equal footing, or somewhat equal footing, at least to the developer. Lots of ways to get involved, attend the public meetings, participate in the siting board hearings, provide written comments. You can call and make verbal comments as well. Folks can become a party to the case, subscribe to the list, monitor things on the PSC siting board website. There's lots of documents and lots and lots and lots and lots of information that becomes part of the public record through this process. And so I think I'm probably out of time. I don't want to go too much into sort of pilot agreements, but I do have more slides in this deck, and maybe at some point I can come back, or if folks have individual questions for me on that aspect of things, I'm happy to talk with you on an individual basis. But just to sort of end on the point that these projects can be controversial. I think there's again a lot of misunderstanding out there about what they entail or what they involve or what the benefits might be. But the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab did a study of wind projects to get a handle on this issue. Why do some communities accept and embrace these projects and why do others not? And it really comes down to these factors. How transparent is the developer being? I think in the Article 10 process, they're forced to be pretty transparent, at least in terms of providing information. Can the community influence the outcome? I think the Article 10 process does that to some extent. It gives the local community a say or a forum in which to express their views. Can individuals participate in the planning process? Yes, I think that's so with Article 10. And what kind of compensation is the local community getting? Now, a lot of times what we see is the developer comes in, they make lease agreements with the property owners where they want to put the wind or the solar equipment. Those landowners get a bonanza and everyone else is left with the impact. And that can be very controversial and divisive. So are there other mechanisms for kind of making the compensation more broadly shared? There are. Pilot agreements and your actions on this project and others are an important part of that. And striking a reasonable balance between generating community benefits in the forms of taxes or pilots, balancing that with the need of the developer to have a financial picture that makes sense and makes the project viable. You can't kill the goose that lays the golden egg, and all of you are very aware of that when it comes to other types of projects because that's what you do every day. But we can build public support by getting involved in this process through your networks, by your means of communicating to the public, letting them know, what's happening. I think that's very important. And NYSERDA is there also to lend a hand. They have support for local communities to get a handle on this issue. I'm perfectly happy to make myself available as you want me to try to educate folks about this as well. So with that, we'll stop there. And,
Yeah, that's
hopefully
great.
that's a broad overview, not too much information, but again, I'll make this presentation available to folks. And if I have questions,
Thanks,
happy to
Chris.
do that too.
Thank you. So I thought it was valuable to have Chris here to give you that baseline information on Article 10 specifically. One thing that was noted in the presentation is that it could be a 4, 5, or 6 year approval process. That's the regulatory process. That's the permitting of the actual development. And if you've had a chance to read the governor's budget proposal, or you attended the session that the lieutenant governor had the other day at the college, they're adamant that, I believe, they're going to change the process. The governor has set that 70% renewable standard by 2030. Well, obviously, we're not going to get there with the current process. So, and I spoke with Senator Seward the other day, who tells me that that proposal has some legs in the legislature. He's made a signature piece of the 2020 budget negotiation. What that all means is that the governor recognizes this process needs to be expedited. How that's going to roll down to everyone, no one knows at this point. That's what they're hammering out in Albany. What the impact will be on us, who knows? I've read some preliminary comments from the governor that the state may look at actually acquiring the properties, actually building the interconnects with the utilities, actually financing the projects, and then rolling out an RFP to the developers. Now, that may or may not take the IDAs out of that 25 and up solar development business. I don't know. I don't know whether if they pass something, will make it retroactive to change. I think we're all going to have to stay on the ball with respect to what those changes are. I know Chris is watching this very carefully. Again, and then I guess my other point is the regulatory and permitting piece is totally independent of the piece that our IDA board is going to have to take on if in fact EDF makes an application for benefits, incentives to make their project happen. When we receive that, I assume we will, we'll have more detailed conversations about how to move forward, because as you know, there are varying opinions out there as to the nature of it and the value of it. But I thought this was a good jumping off point, and Chris is great about getting back to you if you do have any questions individually. If you want to run them through me, if we want to have them come back down at some point, your pleasure.
Chris, does New York make any electricity with offshore wind at this point?
They don't yet, but there's lots of big plans for that. So they issued 2 solicitations. The bids came in much lower cost than we had hoped. So there's a lot of interest in this space. The governor, in his budget proposal, talked about allocating $200 million to establishing port facilities that would be used as staging grounds to deploy the equipment. So that's a big statement, I think. But New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, everyone's looking at that because there's a lot of potential. And as the governor, decommissions or reappoint nuclear plants, there's going to be a need to make up that power, and that's going to be an important part of that. So, if you think site headaches on solar are difficult, just wait till you get into offshore wind. You've got the fishermen and the tourism industry and everyone else, is going to have a lot to say. But I'll just cut to the chase, and again, you'll see my slides. In terms of pilot agreements, we've done the calculations. NYSERDA has tools, spreadsheet tools that they make available to IDAs and others to try to figure out what's a reasonable rate. We've talked with Gary and all the other 4 IDAs, IDA directors in our region. We think $3,500 a megawatt is a reasonable rate, sort of a balance between the interests of raising public funds and allowing development to proceed. a number that is adjustable, and that's really based mostly, I will say, on community solar. Okay, it's sort of a still developing area in terms of these larger scale projects and what the appropriate rate is. I know that EDF wants to go much lower than that, or could get lower than that. Jack Honor, who works for EDF, did tell me that he's intending to submit an application soon for whatever that's worth. So again, happy to come back and talk in more detail about that.
Yeah, so I guess just the final point on that is when you see these applications, it's not just Karen and I sitting here deciding what seems to make sense and what doesn't. We do rely on Chris, we do rely on contacts at NYSERDA to give us that kind of rolling up-to-date information on what the value is of these projects moving forward. So we're not trying not to just throw a dart. We really are trying to balance, as you said, the needs of the developer with the needs of their community, which is our role in all of our pilots. This is no different.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Can you tell everyone? Waiting to.
John?
Yes.
Present your new business.
Thank you. And forgive me for using my phone, just so I have the details in front of me. I was contacted this morning by the attorneys working with Creek Peak, both Creek Peak and their lender, which is now going to be M&T Bank. They're in the midst of a refinancing. You've done this before, but just as a refresher, you have a straight lease transaction active with Creek Peak because you provided them a sales tax incentive. So you have an interest in real estate there. That's the mechanism by which you provide that tax relief. So they're in the midst of a refinance. They are not asking for any new financial assistance from you. But because you have an interest in real estate, you are requested to sign the mortgage documents, confirming that you're mortgaging your interest in it. I've given everybody the opinion in the past that your approval isn't really necessary under these circumstances, that this is within the authority of the executive director to do this, because you're not providing any financial assistance. It's consistent with the project. But not everybody listens to me. They have their own lawyers and their own comfort level involved, and so they would prefer to know that the IDA members have authorized Gary to in fact sign this mortgage with them. Really rather straightforward. Simple questions. I'll answer any questions you have, but it's really as simple as that. So if someone would be willing to make a motion authorizing Gary to execute a mortgage and any other loan documents on behalf of Creek Peak in their refinancing with M&T, that would be helpful.
And you're making that recommendation, bless this motion.
Absolutely. It is a pro forma matter that you should be doing.
I'll make the motion. Second. All in favor? Aye. No, any opposed? Okay.
Now they're down to one owner.
That I don't know. Oh, I think I read that in the paper, though. They didn't mention that here, but yes, I think I read that.
Any other items for new business? Okay. Karen? You have a couple, you have a finance report?
Yes, I do. I'll start off by letting you all know the auditors did come in. I talked about that in the last meeting. They did arrive on January 27th. That was Monday. Two of them, one worked in the IDA, one worked in the BBC, and with their manager coming in on different days, they were here. So Thursday, all, in my opinion, went very well. They didn't indicate any concerns or any problems that would delay getting everything to us for the March meeting. So our March meeting will be very important, that we have a quorum and everybody reviews the information that I'll be sending to you on regarding the audited financial statements. So we should be on track with that. So that was good news. If you have any questions on that, just let me know. And then moving on to the financials, I did give you a cover sheet as I always do for the comments to the financials. We did have receipts and expenses, disbursements that were contractual that were supposed to take place, so that was all moving along just fine. We also received the monies for the Cortland Commerce pilot. They made that payment in two payments. We received our first payment as we should, and everything's been dispersed to the taxing jurisdictions. Other than that, everything was business as
just a report?
He's just
We're gonna hold off on it
Yeah.
until the end?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then with that, we'll close the IDA. All right? Mike always does a motion.